Conversations on race and policing began in response to the police killing of George Floyd on May 25, 2020. In this partnership between CSU San Bernardino and the Brennan Center for Justice, we hope to engage in ongoing discussions related to the history and current context of race, policing, and criminal justice with guests from diverse academic fields and backgrounds.
Hi, everyone. Happy spring, and welcome to our 139th conversation with the Race and Policing webinar. My name is Amber Brodden, and I'm one of the panelists on our team. I'll pass it over to my colleague, Matt Patino, for our land acknowledgement.
Thank you. California State University San Bernardino acknowledges that the land upon which our San Bernardino facility is sited is the ancestral and unceded territory of the Mariam, commonly referred to as the Serrano people, which, in the contemporary era, are represented by two federally recognized Indian tribes, the Yuaviatam of San Manuel Nation and the Morongo Band of Mission Indians. Our histories and stories are intertwined in this space, and by sharing them in culturally appropriate ways, we honor and celebrate our Indigenous neighbors and partners. Since 1965, CSUSB's development has benefited and will continue to benefit from this land's location and resources, and we recognize this. Along with this land acknowledgement, this university affirms tribal sovereignty and our responsibility to work with these tribes to further mutual respect and gratitude for all those involved. I'll turn it over now to Mike German.
Thank you, Matt. Appreciate that. It's my pleasure to welcome an old friend, Eric Lichtblau, to the program to discuss his new book, American Reich, A Murder in Orange County, Neo-Nazis, and a New Age of Hate. Eric was a Washington, D.C. reporter for the New York Times for 15 years, from 2002 to 2017, and for the Los Angeles Times for 15 years before that, concentrating on national security, law enforcement, and legal affairs. He earned the Pulitzer Prize. He earned 2 Pulitzer Prizes in 2018 as part of New York Times team that examined President Trump's Russia ties, and in 2006 for Time stories revealing the existence of a secret National Security Agency surveillance program approved by President George W. Bush after the September 11th attack. His work has also been recognized with numerous other awards, including a Goldsmith Award, Silver Gavel Award, and 2 other Pulitzer Prize winning teams with the Los Angeles Times. Eric's the author of several other books, including his best-selling The Nazis Next Door, How America Became a Safe Haven for Hitler's Men, Bush's Law, The Remaking of American Justice, and Return to the Reich, a Holocaust refugee's secret mission to defeat the Nazis. I met Eric in 2004 in my first interview with a journalist after I resigned from the FBI in protest to the changes that the FBI was making after 9/11. His new book, American Reich, centers on the 2018 murder of Blaze Bernstein by Sam Woodward, a former classmate who, since they graduated, had become increasingly involved in white supremacist groups in Orange County. He uses that story to tell a broader tale of a persistent and violent subculture that gets too little attention. Eric, tell us about your book and why the murder of Blaze Bernstein stood out to you.
Well, thank you, Mike, and thank you to Cal State San Bernardino for having me here today. It's nice to be joined back with Mike, who, as some of you may know, is quite an expert himself in white supremacy. He left that out of his resume at the FBI. He was an expert in white supremacy, worked undercover, and as I tell the story in my first book, he in fact worked. I'm forgetting what was your nickname. What was your undercover name as a white supremacist? Was it
Rock?
Rock. That's right. That's right. He got himself handcuffed undercover working as Rock. He got himself handcuffed and then managed to get everyone else handcuffed and got an entire gang arrested as an undercover guy working in the Northwest U.S. In the 90s. Those are quaint days for white supremacists. Well, my book now is looking at, compared to those days, a real explosion in white supremacy compared to what we had in the 80s and 90s in the Trump era today. We're really going through an epidemic in white supremacy and neo-Nazism. In the last 10 years, the numbers are really off the charts. Hate crimes are at an all-time high, higher than at any point since the FBI began tracking them. And that's the reason that I began writing this book 4 or 5 years ago. We have seen, as many of you probably know, record numbers of massacres of almost every minority group. You can tick through them. The worst massacre of blacks in modern history in Buffalo a few years ago, which overtook the horrible slaughter of blacks in South Carolina a few years before that by Dylan Roof. The worst massacre of Jews on U.S. soil ever, not just in modern history, at the synagogue in Pittsburgh. The worst massacre of Hispanics ever on U.S. soil at a Target in El Paso. The worst massacre of gays, targeting gays at a Colorado nightclub. The worst of Asians, and on and on and on. All at the hands, what joins all those together, all at the hands of really card-carrying neo-Nazis armed with AR-15s. And I wanted to understand what was going on, what joined these young men, almost without exception. The killer in Pittsburgh was a not so young man. He was a middle-aged man, but except for him, these were all young men in their, some of them just teenagers, the rest early 20s, neo-Nazis who become radicalized to kill. In the Trump era, this started in 2015, the same year that Donald Trump came down that golden escalator talking of Mexican rapists. I don't think that's a coincidence. Scholars who I interviewed, many of them who I interviewed, also would tell you that that is not a coincidence, that the coarsening, the hardening of America's heart, that was not a coincidence, that the numbers began shooting up and up and up. I look to not just to this one killing in Orange County of a young man named Blaze Bernstein, but to Orange County as a whole as sort of emblematic of what we're seeing across the country as really as a petri dish of this epidemic of hate crimes, because it was a launching pad for Donald Trump. In 2015, the Orange Curtain, you all are right next door to that in San Bernardino. But it was also a place that was changing. It was sort of purple. It was red for so long, but it was also a place changing with many Hispanic voters, with many Asian voters, and you had a real backlash to that. Not just a few years ago, the unthinkable happened in Orange County, and you had an entire delegation of Democratic congressmen and women being elected in Orange County. And there was a violent backlash from neo-Nazis. And you had many of them who were sent and dispatched January 6th with Confederate flags and neo-Nazi slogans and paraphernalia and T-shirts saying that 6 million wasn't enough on the steps of the Capitol and the riots there. So I wanted to look at Orange County as sort of as a proving ground for what was happening around the country, and I looked at this one killing as emblematic of what was happening with the radicalization of Blaze Bernstein's killer, Sam Woodward, as Mike mentioned, a young man who became radicalized online first, yes, but then went and joined a neo-Nazi hate group a group called Atomwaffen, which I talk a lot in the book about, and went off to a hate camp. They called themselves that. That's not my term. A group in the scrub brush of Texas. He's even started his own digital diary of hate, as he called it. He hated almost all groups, blacks, Hispanics, but no two groups, I should say, did he hate more than gays and Jews. And Blaise Bernstein in Orange County was both of those. And tragically, he killed him, his former high school classmate, in a park not far from where Blaise went to elementary school in Lake Forest. And this became really a tragic reminder for Orange County of just how far they had to go in terms of fighting hate crimes. The local DA took this up as really a cause in fighting neo-Nazis. It took years in the courts before it was finally resolved just a year or so ago. And meanwhile, there were all sorts of other neo-Nazis roaming the streets. And this was, to this day, a case that Orange County is still sort of fighting the ghosts of long and hard. And it became, as I said, kind of a symptom of this bigger epidemic that the country is dealing with. We think of the 1960s as a time of bloody, at the height of the civil rights movement, of the worst bloodshed, or after in the 1910s, the worst of the worst of the bloodshed for instance, in Tulsa and other places after the Red Summer, or even after the Civil War, the worst of the bloodshed. We're living that time now. You look at the numbers of white supremacists and the murders going on now. We're living in that time right now at the hands of neo-Nazis and white supremacists.
You mentioned a number of different atrocities across the country. And, one of the things that I've noticed about how law enforcement reacts to this kind of racist violence is they're very quick to call them lone wolf attacks. And one of the things I think you do well in the book is talk about how those lone wolves aren't really lonely, that they're immersed in a subculture. And certainly Sam Woodward grew up in a family that had harbored some racist ideas, and I think you mentioned he had a Confederate flag over his bed in California, right? He's not
grew up
talking
in
about
Newport
Southern
Beach.
heritage there. This was very clear.
Yeah.
Can you talk about that culture and how sort of tie the way, a new group like Atomwaffen, or you mentioned in the book also the Rise Above movement, another Southern California-based group, might seem like they're blossoming out of nowhere, when really there's a very fertile field that's already created these other groups.
Yeah. So Sam Woodward lived in Newport Beach. He acted in the killing of Blaise Bernstein as a lone wolf. The killing was an act that he carried out alone in a park, midnight in Lake Forest, Orange County. But his radicalization was certainly as part of a group of desperate and hateful young men from the west coast of California to Texas to Florida, as part of several different groups, both Atomwaffen and even before that, communities online, starting with this online community of Iron March, and other groups beginning in the mid to late 2010s. And I mentioned this hate camp in Texas that he went to, and their spiritual guru, who I met with and spent a lot of time interviewing, unfortunately, was a guy named James Mason, who's really kind of a pivotal figure in the book and also in this movement. James Mason, not to be confused with, for the older people in listening today, was a Hollywood actor in the 50s and 60s. He was also a neo-Nazi figure dating back to the 70s and 80s. He's a guy now who's about in his mid 70s. He's about 75 years old now. And he, I think, sort of reflects this resurgence of neo-Nazis today, because he was a cast-off from the neo-Nazi movement 20 years or so ago. He was too extreme for neo-Nazis. Believe it or not, there is such a thing as being too extreme even for neo-Nazis. So he, a little history lesson, this is not news for Mike German and for others who are well versed in this. But he joined up with the American Nazi Party in the 60s when he was just a teenager. He ran away from home and joined up with George Lincoln Rockwell, who was the leader of this back in the 60s in Arlington, Virginia, just outside Washington, who was the head of the American Nazi Party, really the founder. So James Mason, as a teenager, was just sort of an errand boy and started putting together newsletters, helping with that for the American Nazi Party as a teenager, and eventually on typewriters and mimeograph paper back in the day, sent out their newsletters and put together eventually in the 70s their newsletter, what was called Siege, which became, he cobbled together these newsletters into sort of a makeshift book, this racist screed that he would write about coming race wars in the 70s and 80s, hundreds and hundreds of newsletters talking of the evils of Blacks and Jews and other minorities. Which was well read at the time among racist white supremacists, mailed out in envelopes that were disguised because, of course, there was no internet back then. But he became too extreme even for the Nazis back in the 80s for a couple of reasons. First of all, he was pals with Charles Manson, who was in prison then because of the Helter Skelter killings, which made him a little bit taboo. He was also a bit of a pedophile, which also made him taboo among his followers. So he went off to Colorado, and he was banned. And he kind of lived out his life, about most of his middle age, exiled from what was left of the white supremacist movement, while Mike German was in the Northwest, tracking down what was still existing of the white supremacist movement, until about the 2010s, when these the kind of the embers of the white supremacist movement were picking up again with the internet. And then these kids discovered James Mason and his writings in Siege, just as the internet was taking off. And they thought, wow, this guy's really onto something. And don't ask me to really explain that any more than I can, but they thought this guy is really cool. And they discovered his writings and his hundreds and hundreds of pages of Siege and his horrible racist ideologies and lone wolf teachings and killings of Blacks and Jews and minorities, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. And they said, we need to give this guy an audience. And so they put his book online, and they started these groups like Adam Waffen, and they made him required reading. And if you go online now, Read Siege went viral among young white supremacists, Adam Waffen and other young white supremacist groups at Iron March and other places. And to this day, young white supremacists, including Sam Woodward, the killer in Orange County, would go visit him, as Sam did, in packs of 2 or 3 in the middle of the night. They would arrange ahead of time. And it became a rite of passage. It became almost a Mecca, a pilgrimage, to go say that you had seen the great James Mason. You would take a photo with him. You would get a copy of the book signed. You would hear his teachings. You would hear the truth told by James Mason. And he would inspire you. And he would tell you, look, I don't condone violence, because he knew accurately that the FBI was probably listening to, probably wiretapping his home and his phone calls, just as Mike used to do. But if you are going to engage in violence, you need to go big. So after Sam Woodward killed Blaise Bernstein, James was very disappointed, as he told me, because it wasn't worth killing just one gay Jew, he said. That's worthless. That's silly stuff. That's just bullshit. You got to go big. If you're gonna kill a bunch of gays or Jews or blacks, you got to go big. So it wasn't worth the price of just one gay Jew, was what he said, quite obviously, quite heartlessly. So he is an inspiration to thousands of these young kids. So his resurgence is a sign of the horrible times that we're living in. Among these kids. And when you talk, circling back to these aren't just lone wolves. He talks about the lone wolves splitting from the pack, because there is a pack mentality, and then the lone wolf breaks away to make him tougher to nail down.
And the way you bring that up, they realize they're the subject of law enforcement attention at times. So they have almost a double conversation where they're saying things that they think will sound good on a recorder. At the same time, they're making inside references to people who are part of it. There was actually, when I was undercover in the early 90s in Orange County with neo-Nazi skinhead groups, they actually had a manual they called the Lone Wolf Manual that explained how to break contact with your group before you went out and did something violent.
And James Mason has shown up in the last few years. He's an unindicted co-conspirator in various indictments of Adamoffa guys. There have been about 25 Adamoffa guys who've been indicted on various charges, ranging from violence to doxing to swatting of guys, where they send people in to they call in threats, and he's an unindicted co-conspirator because they've got him on wiretaps, but they don't have quite enough to pin it on him. Now, if he was a person of color or a Muslim or what have you, I'm pretty sure that he would have been indicted by now. That's my speculation, but he's still living freely in Denver and is yet to be indicted.
I want to open up some questioning to Matt or Amber or Jeremy if you have any questions.
Sorry, Matt, you go first.
Okay. So I sort of have, I don't know, they almost seem like the obvious questions. Yeah, this is sort of a chicken versus egg. I mean, white supremacy has its history or its roots all the way back to the era of Reconstruction. Is white supremacy on the rise because white supremacy is on the rise, or because it now has permission to be on the rise?
Well, as I see it, it's sort of in the American DNA. It has sprouted up every 60, 65, 70 years or so. I talked about earlier, the period after Civil War and in the Reconstruction with the initial rise of the Klan after World War I, the Civil Rights Movement. Now we're at that same point again. It needs it needs political figures to fan the flames, to give it oxygen. I don't think we've ever had a political figure, at least in modern times, giving it that oxygen the way we have with Donald Trump. Why do I say that? That I suppose that may seem obvious to many of your listeners. I suppose to those on the right, that may seem like blasphemy, on the other hand. So I'll give me a few minutes to justify that, I suppose, to those who might hear that with a critical ear. How can I say that Trump has fanned the flames of white supremacy? Taking it backwards, he has given them a place of influence and prestige which they have never held before in at least in modern presidential history. So going backwards, we could take it forward, starting with the Unite the Right. I'm going to end there rather than starting there. Going backwards, he has blocked the doors of immigration from virtually every group, every country with people of color, except for white South Afrikaners. He talks of shithole countries, of course. He speaks fondly of people of Nordic descent, and he has not only spoken fondly of white South Afrikaners, but he has specifically opened the doors to tens of thousands of white South Afrikaners based on a neo-Nazi myth that was perpetuated by Elon Musk, that Black South Africans are killing white South Afrikaners. Not true. It has been debunked. This is only the most recent time that he has perpetuated neo-Nazi myths. Only the most recent time. The time before that, which I write about in the book and which I've written about in columns before that, you'll remember was, I'm sure you remember the incident. You may not remember the source, or you may never have known about it, was the horrible episode at the tail end of the campaign when he was debating Kamala Harris in November 2024 with the cat-eating and dog-eating Haitians. Where did that come from? Totally debunked. Where did that come from? That came from a neo-Nazi group in Ohio called Blood Order, who started this, what would seem like a laughable myth that the Haitians, legal Haitians, by the way, they were legal until he started kicking them out just a few weeks ago here on legal temporary visas, and now he's actively trying to get them out of the country, were eating cats and dogs. That was a myth, a debunked myth started by this neo-Nazi group called Blood Order. And when J.D. Vance, the president, picked up on that, first of all, were you aware? I'm guessing the answer was no. Were you aware that started with a neo-Nazi group? No, I'm guessing most of your listeners were not. That did not get wide coverage. Certainly when the president picked up on that, it got wide coverage. But what they said on one of their encrypted channels, the leader of that Blood Order group said, now even the president is talking about it. This is what real influence looks like. Just imagine if you're a state chapter in Ohio of a neo-Nazi group, just imagine that the former president is talking about what you think of as just sort of a little drive-by hit piece in Ohio against the local Haitians, just to sort of like vandalism, little petty vandalism. And now the president is talking about it at the national. So you can go back and go back to January 6th, where he's fanning the flames on January 6th by, remember what the Proud Boys thing started on January 6th with also with a debate where Chris Wallace asked him to denounce the white supremacists. There had been lots of talk about the president and his sympathies for white supremacists. So he was asked, he's given what we in journalism call a softball question. Mr. President, can you denounce once and for all white supremacists? So how does the president do that? He says, well, okay, what do you want me to say? I'm pretty much quoting him accurately. Okay, the Proud Boys stand by and stand down. That's quite a denunciation. That's not exactly a denunciation. So the Proud Boys loved that. They just got a national shout out from the president. So they said, "Hey, we will stand down and stand by," and that's what they did. They were ready in action on January 6th. Then, of course, he pardoned 1,500 of them, even the violent ones, which shocked his own people. So that's the special access that he has given them. And I could go on and on and on back to Charlottesville and Unite the Right, when of course he said there were very fine people on both sides. So he has given them an oxygen chamber in fanning the flames that they have never had before. Their numbers are higher. There's 165, a record by the count of the Southern Poverty Law Center, a record high number of white supremacist groups, higher than at any point that we've ever had in the United States. Hate crimes higher than the FBI has ever counted before, and the biggest slaughters, the biggest massacres of virtually every group, higher than we've ever had before in modern history.
And Jeremy, you had a question.
Thanks. I'm trying to formulate it here. I'm from New York, upstate New York, and so we have our share there. But I'm new to the California context, and I'm learning, and I'm trying to, over the last 10, 15 years, understand this local history. And Mike Davis was a guest on our series before he passed away, and his history helped me understand how things like HOAs and that kind of thing in the going back through the 20th century gave us a kind of lay of the land of Southern California, and his book City of Quartz and his other work helped me understand this in Southern California, Los Angeles. And I have family and neighbors in New York, but also family around here in the Southwest who are pretty hard right Republicans, and would, I think, I don't think I know, would dissociate themselves from this level of, and they would say it's a totally different animal, right? And then there's this sort of Mike Davis normal Republicans that he looks at of these HOAs, the sort of not in my backyard, and the infrastructural bigotries and exclusion, sundown towns, and that kind of thing. And I was wondering what your advice or thoughts would be on addressing what I see as a very clear link. And even in the family of Woodward, between his father and him, you can sort of see that embodied, where his father has a certain level of, maybe Elks Club sort of presence in the community or whatever, and then at home he has some really foul bigotry that his son hears and amplifies as their love language, as they're bonding over bigotry, they're bonding over really violent kind of rhetoric. So that link to me is very evident, and you draw it very clearly. And I wonder if your advice is just read the room, depends who you're talking to, or if you have any thoughts on sort of addressing what, as you noted in Matt's question, to us maybe a self-evident connection, but do we also want to help people and say, of course you're not, so come back to the land of the living. And sort of shed that. How do you engage with those sort of conversations, and is there a constructive way to do so?
Well, it's a tough question. It's something I think we've all been struggling with for these last 10 plus years now. How do we have a civil dialogue and can you have that conversation across the dinner table? I mean, another place in Orange County that I talk about in the book is a tiny community, a gated community for the most part, in Ladera Ranch, which is a tiny place in Orange County where there was some reason for hope. I get that question a lot. Like, is it a version of your question, like, is there reason for optimism, where there was this Asian family that was really terrorized by, these weren't white supremacists per se. They were teenagers, really. They were kids who terrorized this Asian family for months and months, and the cops wouldn't do anything. It started as sort of just a juvenile, ding and ditch thing, but escalated for months where they were there was during COVID where they would shout just horrible things in the midst of COVID about anti-Asian things, and leaving things at their door and throwing rocks and terrorizing the young kids, and leaving pornographic things at their door of an Asian variety. And the father had installed video systems and a new gate and called the police. They wouldn't do anything. They couldn't do anything. And then finally the neighbors sort of banded together like, well, this isn't who we are. It really divided the community. It was a very Republican community. And some of them said, well, these are just kids being kids. But others came and they stood guard there for weeks and weeks. A state assemblyman came out. People came from far outside the community, and there were stories in the LA Times and the Orange County Register, and it became both a dividing point. And in fact, there were right around this time, there were several people from Ladera Ranch who went to the Capitol and were arrested on January 6th. So you had staunch Republicans, but then there were others who stood guard and defended this family. So it became a really polarizing thing. And in the end, the family sort of got their piece, which was really all they wanted. So the force for good won out. But it took an awful lot of shouting and it took a lot of messiness for that to happen. How does that? It's not exactly it's not the. The bigots didn't stand down easily, and it's not the cleanest path to get there, I don't have an easy solution to that. There's stories of inspiration, but it's a lot of times, certainly in this day and age, law enforcement isn't willing to do much. The feds, certainly the FBI is doing less and less. These days, especially, there was a period a few years ago where the FBI was certainly taking more aggressive steps against these white supremacist groups. They had made these types of domestic extremist groups a top priority after years where foreign inspired extremists were, after 9/11, the top priority. Then seeing what had happened in South Carolina, in Buffalo, in El Paso, there had been a really remarkable turn, a pivot. Now that's certainly not true anymore. I mean, it's all about immigration. The head of national security, the FBI, was on the Hill a few weeks ago and gave an embarrassing performance. I think Mike, I'm sure, would agree. I don't want to speak for Mike. I'd like his perspective, but where he was asked about Antifa and he couldn't say what it was or where it was or how many people were in it or where it was based or even form an intelligible thought about it. But so I think that whatever crackdown there was against violent white supremacists is pretty much gone at this point. So, you hope that there will be civil, constructive dialogue for the better. It's hard to be hopeful sometimes, though, in this day and age.
And I think the mention of Antifa or anti-fascists and the way the Trump administration, both during the first administration and this one, have labeled anti-fascists as the enemy. which I think says a lot more about how you position yourself than it does about the people that you're targeting. But it's been odd to me how, particularly law enforcement, who's often a target of white supremacist and neo-Nazi violence, uh, looks at this kind of violence as less of a threat to the nation, certainly, but even to them, even though the data would show otherwise. And how, and I bring in your previous book, The Nazi Next Door. I knew about the bringing in the Nazi scientists into the United States, but really reading your book gave me the first inclination that it was a much broader program than that. And many, German World War II Nazis,
Yeah.
some in leadership, were brought to the United States and given new identities. How our government officials tend to look at Nazism and white racism as a benign force rather than something that produces this kind of deadly violence on a regular basis.
Yeah.
And how you can explain, I think when you talk to the average person, and I'm sure when you do your book talks, that, most people are horrified to learn this. And I think that's what made James Mason and Siege appealing to these young men, is that it's a forbidden history, right? We've never heard about this stuff. Oh my gosh, this stuff was being written in the 1970s. This is something that's been kept from us. It must be so important. It must be so enlightening that the powers that be are afraid of it. That's what draws the attraction, or at least part of it.
And just the rhetorical dog whistles from Trump himself, talking about, the immigrants poisoning the blood, which is language from Trump's own mouth. And there was just yet another story. There have been dozens, if not hundreds of stories I write about this in the book. There was another story in the Times today about all the messaging from DHS and other agencies just in the last couple of weeks, quoting Nazi language, that is just music to the white supremacist ears, from songbooks and things from the Nazis, and there's too much of that for it to be coincidence or accidental. They love that. They pick up on that, and which, by the way, is also part of Orange County's strength and history. There is the white power music. Orange County is that's part of its lure, is that it is the base of white power music is in Orange County. And it's got this powerful underground club scene that's the center of world white power music, going back to the 1980s through today. Started in Britain, but then it quickly made its way over to Orange County. So that's an enormous attraction to Orange County. So that messaging from Trump on down, about poisoning the blood, and this language, that resonates with these young people.
And do you know if anyone, are you concerned that these DHS, Department of Homeland Security, recruitment materials are using this kind of language that is similar to either what was done in 1930s Germany or more modern sort of white supremacist themes, that's recruiting a workforce now that they've been funded to hire many thousands of agents, is drawing more white supremacists into the organization? Do you know if anyone's tracking that?
I think so. There was one guy just in the last year who was a top DHS official in Texas. I'm forgetting his title, but he was a senior DHS official in Texas who was secretly a top neo-Nazi official. He had his own website under a pseudonym, and he was recruiting people on his neo-Nazi website, and he was outed by a news organization as being one and the same. You know, he had a day job as a DHS official and a night job as a neo-Nazi official with a flourishing website, and that was one where they actually cut ties with him. That was beyond the pale. But you know, there are other guys there was another White House guy where when he had a similar problem, they just shuffled him off. He was up for a Senate confirmation job. They just shuffled him off to a job that didn't require Senate confirmation. You know, remember there was just a few months ago, there was the scandal of the day. This was 6 or 7 scandals ago, where there were the young RNC officials, where there were hundreds and hundreds of emails showing that they, you know, talking about having a little bit of Hitler in me. They were bragging about their admiration for Hitler. That unfortunately happened just as I was putting the book to bed, as I was writing the epilogue in the book. So I'll have to add that for the paperback when that comes out in a few months. But there was a whole flood of Republican Nazi news right around the time that I was writing the epilogue, and I had to tell the editors, like, no, you need to stop, just finish the epilogue, you can't write anymore. I'm like, wait. He said, no more Republicans saying stupid Nazi comparison stuff. It was like, okay, so I'll have to put that when the paperback comes out in 6 months. But you know, there's almost too much to include. But so the young Republicans admiring Hitler will be in the paperback, hopefully. So.
And Amber, did you have anything?
Yeah, I actually wanted to really say thank you, Eric. This
Oh,
is a
you're
really
welcome.
eye-opening conversation for me. I'm from Lancaster, California, which has had its history of being a sundown town and you know, lynchings of Black boys and all of this different mixed history. And I'm honestly fairly new to Orange County, but since I've moved into this area, I've constantly felt like this undertone of the supremacy that's been present that you're highlighting. Um, and I think my question is around the language of sundown towns, with seeing how much we're having massacres and violence in broad daylight. Do you still see the need to even use terms like that? Or do you feel like there is still, you know, I don't know how to describe it, maybe the possibility of more violence being permeated behind the scenes at nighttime in certain areas of let's say Orange County in particular?
Yeah, well, Orange County, as I talk about the book, certainly has a long and really tortured history going back to the sundown towns, to the Klan, where you had Klan members openly serving on city councils in Anaheim, in other cities, and then the John Birch Society in the 50s, who were sort of white nationalist light, if you will, like they were not quite full on Klan members. They were kind of a version of that, and the Republican members of Congress in the 50s and 60s and 70s, into the 80s and 90s, I say, like, it was almost a contest to see who could offend the most minority groups, just the most amazing things. And I started my career with the LA Times working in Orange County. So I covered some of these guys in the late 80s and early 90s. And they would just say the most amazing things that I don't even think you would print these days, because they were so offensive back when I was a young reporter. Like, just, well, I guess that's not true, since we now have Trump in the White House. He would have been a great Orange County congressman back in the day, but comparable to Trump. But and you know, it sort of that there was just this constant racial turmoil and angst. There were, and I write extensively. The editor and I at my publishing house, we really debated long and hard about how how to structure this book. And so we decided in the end, like, let's pick a place, not such an obvious place, like, okay, the deep South that everyone thinks of, okay, not such an obvious place, but like Orange County, but sort of an interesting place with this long, deep history of racism, and look at how hate and racism have grown there over the years, and how that's given rise today to white supremacy. So that's what we decided to do there. And now you have all these hate groups that have just exploded there just in the last 10 years, really. Literally training. There's Mike mentioned earlier the Rise Above movement. They literally train on the beaches and they go to these rallies. These are guys with a very different MO, where these are the hand-to-hand combat guys, that really buff guys who just go to rallies and go up at Berkeley and Orange County. They went to Charlottesville. They go all over. They were ultimately charged with rioting and federal charges to go to beat the shit out of minorities or Antifa or Democrats, and beat the shit out of anyone they can find, because they're stronger and faster than the other guys. And they are white supremacists who just hate the other guys. And they think that the white race is going to be extinct if they don't beat the shit out of all the other guys. And you just see the crisis point that we're reaching at the hands of, you combine them with Sam Woodward, with with many of these groups. And another example of that is with the federal government, and the effort by the Trump administration to manipulate the numbers. The day after the Charlie Kirk shooting, what the Justice Department did was to take down from all the federal websites all the data that showed that for every 10 excuse me, for every one shooting on the right, there were of like a Charlie Kirk, there were there were 10 times as many shootings on the right for every one on the left. In other words, there were 10 times as many on the right as on the left. But the Justice Department basically whitewashed and took all that data down from their website after the Charlie Kirk, which was the one outlier of someone on the left shooting someone on the right. So you won't find that on their websites anymore, because they didn't want that data didn't help their argument, because we've had all these horrible right-wing motivated shooters, again in South Carolina, in Buffalo, et cetera, motivated by extreme right-wing violence. So yeah, it's scary times.
And I always find it interesting when people talk about social media as a boon to these violent groups, because it's also a liability, right? It creates a permanent record, and that makes it easier. Were it not for the Discord chats, the Unite the Right rally leaders and planners had put together, there would not have been the civil suit. And why there wasn't a more criminal investigation of that, I think, is a good question, and gets to why the police don't seem to, even though this is now much of it conducted in plain sight. I mean, you mentioned the Rise Above movement had a website where they were posting videos of their crimes, beating people up, posting videos of training. So it's no longer Okay, they
and
went to a protest.
recruiting other members using
Right. So you know, this
they would
idea that, oh,
post
well,
videos of themselves beating people up to recruit other members.
right. But there's also, you know, from a law enforcement perspective, evidence of a criminal intent, right?
Yes,
I
yes,
don't train in boxing and wrestling in order to go to a protest, right?
yes.
That it's very clear what they were doing, and yet they were able to do that. Same with the Proud Boys for a long time. And until they commit an atrocity like January 6th or the Unite the Right rally for the Rise Above movement, which is what drew public attention to them, that demanded some kind of action, that law enforcement is slow to react, even though this violence is occurring in plain sight.
Right. One other point that I piggyback on there in terms of social media, so I'm glad you mentioned that, is the guardrails that have really been abolished. I talk about this because it's a fairly recent occurrence in the epilogue of the book, but in the last year or so, the guardrails were fairly low already on Facebook, on Instagram, on especially on Twitter and X after Elon Musk bought that. The guardrails for hate speech, which of course is protected by the First Amendment. You can't go to jail. The government can't prosecute you for hate speech. That's protected by the First Amendment. But that doesn't mean that these social media companies have to allow you to say horrible, vile things, hateful things on their platforms. So there were rules against those on most of these platforms. They all had, and I stress had, rules against hate speech until a few years ago. Fairly minimal rules, but there were rules. Now those guard rules have been wiped away to almost nothing, starting with Elon Musk. So a lot of these groups, like the Proud Boys and Adamoff and all these other groups, they still, for operational reasons, will use encrypted channels like Parler and Telegram and et cetera, Gab, for if they want to say, let's meet here and beat the shit out of some blank, whatever. They don't want the FBI to see that. But if they want to just talk about hateful, vile things, they can do that very easily these days on public social media, because Elon Musk and Mark Zuckerberg in the last year or two have made that so much easier than it used to be, because they have torn down whatever rules were left for hate speech in the name of quote unquote free speech. And that's because Donald Trump wants it that way. Not to pick on Trump, I know I have a lot here, but and the reason for that, of course, is because Trump got in so much trouble originally after January 6th. He got suspended, if not banned, from many of these platforms for inciting violence, which I think most lawyers and common sense people would agree that he did. So he lost his platforms and then went and created his own. So then when Elon Musk bought Twitter and turned it into X, he reinstated Trump, first of all. And then second of all, he smashed those guardrails down. And Mark Zuckerberg then followed suit at Instagram and Facebook and their other properties. And so now, if I read to you, it would take me a second to find, but at Meta and Instagram, and it's specifically authorized. You can go and say that blacks, for instance, are a violent race. You could say that gays are abnormal and freaky. I'm quoting from their new authorized guidelines on free speech. You can say that Hispanics are blank. You can say that Jews are blank. These are their new policies on hate speech and free speech. So, fine, they can go in their encrypted channels. So Nick Fuentes on the night of, who he is. He's sort of the new Charlie Kirk now. the night of Trump's election, he went wild with this sort of what most people would call now hate speech, which was allowed. He said, hey, bitch, your body is mine, and da 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 da, just went after everyone because he knew he could. And welcome to the new hate speech in America. So it's anything goes. It's the Wild West of social media. So
on that depressing note.
Yeah. So
sorry, Mike, before I turn it over to Mike and Eric for any final thoughts, I just wanted to thank Thin Lee, as always, for his technical support. And also I want to thank Project Rebound for their support, Fowl Library, also occasional support in terms of book purchases. And I see Anika Anderson and Sophia are in today from Project Rebound. So thank you very, very much. Thanks, of course, to our hosts, Amber, Matt, and Mike. And it's a thrill and a delight, although the subject is so intense, to have such a prolific and remarkable guest as Eric Lichtblau, multiple Pulitzer-winning author. Thank you very much for joining. I just want to do that quick order of business, and I'll turn it back over to Mike and Eric to wrap up.
Yeah, and I just want to thank you again, Eric, for writing all of these books, but certainly for appearing here and talking to our audience. Really appreciate your work.
It's my pleasure. If anyone wants a signed book, you can just DM me or get in touch with me. I'll send you a signed book, or through the forum. However,
I already have one.
Yes, or any of your listeners is what I meant. Yes. Well, Mike gave me a great blurb for the back cover, so that I know you've got yours. Yeah, but
yeah.
Your listeners is what I meant. Yeah.
Exactly.
Yes.
All right. Well, thanks again, Eric. I really appreciate it. Jeremy, Thin, Matt, and Amber, everybody who participated, thank you very much. Talk to you soon.
Thank you for having me.
Thank you. Bye.
Conversations on Race and Policing has been supported by funding from the California State University San Bernardino College of Social and Behavioral Sciences, Fowl Library, and the Diversity, Equity, and Inclusion Committee. Thin Lee is our technical consultant. Pamela Crossan provides administrative support, and Alan Yavor provides communication support. There's more information in the show notes, and please join us online at csusb.edu/CORP for upcoming programming and to find our catalog of over 100 past events with guests like Robin D.G. Kelly, Jamal Bowman, Dorothy Roberts, and many more.